Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're going to break down how the American Revolution went from basically a simple argument over money to an all-out war for independence. So how does a squabble over tea and taxes blow up into a brand new nation? Well, let's get into it. Believe it or not, it all kicked off with a really, really expensive victory. Okay, so Britain just wrapped up this massive global war with France. You might know it as the 7 Years' War. They won big time, taking all of France's territory in North America. Sounds great, right? But that victory came with a massive price tag. I mean, we're talking 60 million pounds in debt, a staggering amount of money back then. So Britain's basically broke. And they look over at the American colonies thinking, hey, we spend a ton of cash protecting you guys. It's only fair you help us foot the bill. But the colonies were like, hold on a second. No. They argued they'd already paid their dues with their own soldiers and their own resources. So Britain decides to go over their heads, bypassing their local governments to tax them directly. First up was the Sugar Act in '64, and then came the one that really got people fired up a year later, the Stamp Act. And this Stamp Act thing was, wow, it was on everything. We're not just talking about official documents. Any piece of paper you can think of, a legal deed, a newspaper, even your playing cards, had to have a paid stamp on it. It literally touched every single part of daily life. So yeah, people were livid. And it wasn't just about the cash, it was the principle of the whole thing. For years, they'd pretty much been left to govern themselves. Now, suddenly, a parliament an ocean away, where they had zero representatives, was making these rules and taking their money. And that's where we get that famous line, no taxation without representation. The colonists fought back with what they had, boycotts. They just stopped buying British stuff. And it actually worked. Britain repealed the Stamp Act. But in the very same breath, they passed a new law saying, just so you know, we absolutely can tax you whenever we want. And then bam, they slapped a whole new set of taxes on things like glass, lead, paper, tea, and oil. So here we go again, the colonist boycotts, and again, Britain kind of backs down. King George III gets rid of all the new taxes, except for one. He keeps the tax on tea, basically just to prove a point, to say, I'm still in charge. And to really drive it home, he sends 1,000 soldiers to Boston. As you can imagine, that just cranked the tension up to 11. And things just spiraled from there, and fast. In March 1770, you have the Boston Massacre, panicked soldiers firing into a crowd. A few years later, boom, the Boston Tea Party. And then Britain just drops the hammer with the Intolerable Acts, basically shutting down Massachusetts' government and taking direct control. Boston went from tense to a total crisis point. And for the other colonies, this was a huge uh-oh moment. They're looking at what's happening in Massachusetts and thinking, if they can do it to them, they can do it to us. So, in response, 56 delegates from 12 of the 13 colonies get together for the First Continental Congress. This was basically them forming a new unified government to figure out what to do next. So what's their big plan? Well, after a lot of talk, they decide to ask nicely. Seriously, they send a formal petition to the king. When Britain's answer is basically no, Congress turns to the local militias, these guys called Minutemen, because they could be ready in a minute, and tells them to start gathering weapons. Okay, so now Britain decides to make a move. They hear the rebels are stashing weapons and ammunition out in Concord. So the British general in Boston comes up with a plan, a secret nighttime raid to grab all the weapons before this thing can turn into a real rebellion. Right, but it's hard to keep a secret like that. Patriot spies found out about the plan, and writers, including the famous Paul Revere, galloped through the countryside warning everyone the regulars are out. This gave the Minutemen just enough time to get ready. So picture this, sunrise, on the town green in Lexington. The two sides face off. You've got a small group of rebels on one side and a force of professional British soldiers on the other. Tensions are sky high, and in all that confusion, someone fires a shot. And just like that, the war had begun. Now, what's really interesting is that even after shots were fired at Lexington and Concord, and after the super bloody Battle of Bunker Hill, most colonists still weren't thinking independence. Not yet. They were fighting for their rights as British citizens, still hoping they could patch things up with the crown. But then, this little pamphlet comes out called Common Sense, and it just explodes. The author Thomas Paine uses really simple, direct language to make this powerful argument for breaking away completely. This was a pretty radical idea at the time, but the pamphlet got passed around everywhere, read out loud in pubs. It completely changed the conversation. And it worked. The Continental Congress was finally on board. They gave Thomas Jefferson the job of writing an official declaration. And on July 4th, 1776, after some edits, it was done. The United States of America officially told the world they were their own country. Of course, there's a huge asterisk here. The guy who wrote those beautiful words about all men being created equal, Thomas Jefferson, yeah, he owned more than 100 enslaved people. It's a contradiction that's right at the heart of the country's founding. So how did the British take this news? Well, they didn't see it as a declaration of independence. They saw it as treason. And the king responded by sending a massive military force to New York with one goal: crush this rebellion for good. George Washington gets his new Continental Army together to defend New York City, but I mean, look at this matchup. It's not even a fair fight. His small, poorly trained army is up against the most powerful military on the planet. And the Americans have, wait for it, 0 warships. The battle was a total rout. The British pulled a classic decoy move, then swung their main force around and just smashed the American flank. Washington's army was crushed, suffering huge losses, and got pinned with their backs to the river. Somehow, in what was a pretty miraculous escape, they managed to get across the river in a thick fog. But it was only a temporary reprieve. They were chased down and beaten again, right there on Manhattan. I mean, it was just one defeat after another, a complete and total disaster. The army was falling apart, and people were seriously starting to question if Washington was the right guy for the job, as his army was chased all the way across New Jersey. It's honestly amazing they still existed as an army at all. They had been completely and utterly beaten, which leaves this one giant, looming question. On the run and facing total destruction, how in the world could they possibly survive?